continues to miss and doesn't quite understand. They don't understand why Kashmir is such a flashpoint. They don't understand why it is such a hot topic for both India and Pakistan. And beyond that, the fact that you've got two nuclear armed rivals that could be at the brink of war. I think even in this instance, what is now alarming, which is being again missed by Western capitals and their leaders, is the fact that certain red lines have now been crossed and that baseline has now moved, which means the next time there is a flashpoint, we are going to have those lines across yet again, and it could become even more dangerous than, frankly, this time round from 2019 and the various other moments where there has been conflict. But my main frustration in my newsroom, whether it was at the BBC or at Sky News, frankly, is a real lack of fully grasping the importance of this this conflict, not just for the region, but the entire international community.
You know, it's interesting you said that every time there was a terror attack and there was subsequent military retaliation by India, you know, the envelope was pushed a bit more. The chain of escalation went up a bit more. And so was the case now as well. You know, traditionally it was always thought that two countries that have nuclear weapons, you know, will not attack each other because that's the ultimate form of deterrence, if you will. But over the last 3 or 4 instances, has India sort of changed the game or moved the envelope in a way that Pakistan cannot use these terror proxies and hope or imagine that there will not be a retaliation or there won't be a consequence, or take refuge behind the nuclear weapons and say, you know, India can't hit us because we have the nuclear weapon?
I think it's a little bit of both. I interviewed Ambassador Amar Sinha very early on after the Pahalgam terrorist attack. And at the time, he said that, you know, we can't continue to be told that there will be this nuclear threat and therefore we can't take action, and that we have to tolerate a terrorist attack on Indian soil time and time again. And I think that you know, it's one of those things where what is most concerning is that not only is Pakistan a nuclear armed state, which of course India is too, but it also does have this policy, for those who know Pakistan's history and its relationship with terror organizations, backing them, funding them, supporting them, giving sanctuary to terrorist organizations, whether it was in Bahawalpur or other parts of the country in the tribal belts. They have done that for decades. And I think what's often missed is, because Pakistan comes out and denies these, it is often bought by journalists and, frankly, diplomats around the world. The United States spent decades giving billions of dollars to Pakistan in the war against terror, knowing that they were providing sanctuary for these terrorist organizations. And so the finger of blame is often pointed at India for taking action off the back of one of these attacks. And I think that, you know, there is huge difference between India and Pakistan. India is now a great power, and Pakistan is a weaker power, and it is still finding itself not cracking down on these terrorist groups. And fundamentally, that is the issue. But these are questions that aren't necessarily asked of Pakistani authorities.
So when you did ask that, and now it's become an interview that's gone viral, you know, internationally, when you did ask that to the Pakistani defense minister, and he said pretty nonchalantly, I thought, that's what we've been doing all along. That's what we've been doing, this dirty work for the United States and for the West for the last 30 years. When he said that, what was running through your mind? Did you feel like a gotcha moment?
You know, the first time I heard Pakistani authorities say this, I was at 2 instances before this defense minister's interview. One was when President Hamid Karzai had made a trilateral visit to Islamabad with then Asif Ali Zardari as the president of Pakistan, and Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, was there as well for this trilateral talk. And I stood up and I asked the Pakistani authorities about the double game that they were playing. And at that time, you know, there was a sort of flurry at this particular press conference, because you were just supposed to ask, very cordial questions of all of the different leaders who were there. So there was frustration at me for asking that question. The second time I asked was when I interviewed General Pervez Musharraf, and at the time, he was a retired general living in exile, and he said to me, yes, we use them as proxies. It shocked me, but it didn't generate any kind of news, because the timing and because he was retired, and he was sort of saying it in passing. I think what shocked me this time round was that the current defense minister of Pakistan, at a moment where the country could be at the brink of war, off the back of the Pahalgam terrorist attack in Kashmir, when I asked him this question, I thought they would go through the normal process of denial. So I think I was quite shocked. In that moment, I sort of didn't know how to take it. And I just wanted to give him even time to clarify, because I actually thought he misunderstood my question. He went further on to sort of confirm what he'd actually said to me.
So why do you think, and you referenced this in your previous answer as well, it's not just against India that Pakistan has used these terror groups and terror proxies to target Indians, but they've used this against Afghanistan as well. Why do you think then the international community has given such a long rope to Pakistan and not held it accountable for this? Because any other part of the world, if a country had been doing this as almost like a policy for the last 20, 30 years, they would have been held to account. Why then hasn't it happened with Pakistan?
And when you look at the number of incidents, Zakir, I mean, you look at the murder of Daniel Pearl in 2002, an American journalist in Karachi. Just weeks earlier, he had reported on the fact that terror camps and madrasa seminaries were flourishing, despite the Pakistani authorities saying that they were launching crackdowns on them. When you look at the billions of dollars that have been invested in Pakistan in the so-called war on terror, when you look at the fact that Osama bin Laden was discovered by Pakistan's ally, the United States, Navy SEALs were sent there in an operation that was completely secret. I mean, when you're giving a nation billions of dollars, they're fighting terrorism with you, and yet you're too afraid for the information to leak to the authorities, and in secret you enter Pakistani soil and you kill a known terrorist that is known to be behind 9/11. I mean, that in itself was quite extraordinary, and in that moment, big questions should have been asked of Pakistan. Why is this man this terrorist, this known terrorist, being given sanctuary just a few kilometers away from a major military installation and headquarters? It wasn't until 2018, when President Donald Trump was surrounded by a number of people who fully grasped and understood the Afghan-Pakistan file and understood and you'll remember that Donald Trump surrounded himself by a number of 3- and 4-star generals at the time who'd fought and operated in Afghanistan, so they knew firsthand what Pakistan was doing, and they encouraged President Trump to take away military aid from Pakistan. And then, in the years after that, there was a threat of putting Pakistan on a grey list, the Financial Action Task Force, of a state sponsor of terrorism, and then they sort of took certain action, arresting certain jihadis and terrorists, putting them in prison. So Pakistan has had this long history, and yet, as you say, it's baffling that to this day, whether it's Washington or London, haven't been able to, other Western capitals haven't been able to hold Pakistan to account for having that policy.
All right, one final word, and I think you also started off by referring to this, about the frustrations about international media not getting the scale of this conflict or how much it could escalate. One of the frustrations here in India, certainly within government, maybe even amongst ordinary Indians, is that the Western media it doesn't quite get India's point of view when it comes to this issue, because they still, parrot a very old narrative that Kashmir is a disputed thing, and it's between India and Pakistan and so on and so forth. Whereas for India, for the last 20 years, certainly, the fundamental issue has always been about terrorism, and somehow it feels like the Western media narrative does not portray India as the victim and Pakistan as the perpetrator, but more like, this is a historic dispute and these two are equals, and there is a degree of hyphenation, if you will. Is that a valid concern, and how can that concern be addressed?
I think that, to my earlier point, that India, its economy, where it stands now on the international stage, this extraordinary partnership that we've seen for the last 25 years between Washington and Delhi, this bipartisan partnership that they have developed. And we've seen Prime Minister Modi was one of the first leaders to go to Washington and meet with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. So there is an understanding of Delhi's importance, certainly when it comes to the rivalry with China as well. And yet I think that Delhi, India, hasn't necessarily done a very good job in highlighting the issue of Kashmir and the issue of terrorism in Pakistan enough, frankly, because I think in many ways, India is a population of 1.4 billion. It sort of focuses internally on its internal affairs and issues. And then when a flare up like this happens, it sort of takes certain measures, and the world is quite confused about why it's come to the brink, not fully understanding what was the underlying issues under the surface. And so one of the things that I've sort of said in previous interviews is we don't often hear from, Indian officials talking about these things, not just in this period where there's a flashpoint, but in other times as well. And to be fair completely to Pakistan, they are willing to put up their defense minister, their interior minister. They're willing to come to the cameras, regardless of how the interviews end up and the accusations. They're willing to take the tough questions and deal with it. And I think that is one of the things that perhaps culturally is a difference between India and Pakistan.
All right, Yalda Hakim, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for this fascinating conversation, and thank you for what you've been doing through your work, through your journalism, in highlighting this flare-up between India and Pakistan. As you said, an issue that many in the West may not necessarily care about. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
US President Donald Trump has implored Ukraine to accept a Russian proposal for direct talks rather than insist on a ceasefire first. The leaders of France, Germany, the UK, and Poland had visited Kiev and set a deadline of Monday for Russia to accept a 30-day ceasefire. Otherwise, they warned that Russia will face additional sanctions. When President Vladimir Putin of Russia made a counter-offer of direct talks without mentioning a ceasefire, France and Germany both rebuffed the proposal. In fact, President Trump's envoy to Ukraine, who was also part of the talks, General Keith Kellogg, had said earlier that Russia should halt the hostilities as a first step in the negotiations. But Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social that President Putin of Russia does not want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine. The Russian leader, according to Trump, wanted direct talks to be hosted by Turkey later this week in Istanbul. Ukraine should agree to this immediately, Trump wrote on his social media post. Zelensky responded pretty cautiously to the Russian counteroffer for direct talks. He once again insisted there has to be a halt in the fighting before there can be any talks. But after Trump's post, Zelensky added a new twist to the ongoing diplomatic brinkmanship. Zelensky said he would personally be attending the negotiations in Istanbul. Putin, when he proposed those direct talks, did not intend for a presidential meeting, did not intend for a meeting between himself and Zelensky. He just said direct talks, but at a junior level. Zelensky's declaration in a post on X did not clarify whether his participation would depend on Russia first accepting a ceasefire. But he once again called on Russia to halt the hostilities to allow for diplomacy. The flurry of exchanges came hours after Putin effectively rejected the Monday ceasefire deadline, and instead he proposed that direct talks between representatives of the two countries take place this week in Istanbul. Before setting the Monday deadline and threatening additional sanctions, European leaders had spoken with President Trump on the phone from Kiev on Saturday. They said that the United States would also impose sanctions on Russia if Putin did not agree to a truce. But Trump started singing an altogether different tune. In February 2025, US and Russian delegates met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to try and discuss improving relations and also to put forth plans to end the war in Ukraine. Notably, in that meeting, no Ukrainian or European delegations were invited to that summit. Additionally, there was a further follow-up meeting in March where American and Ukrainian representatives met in Jeddah, again in Saudi Arabia, to discuss these peace negotiations. America had to restore aid and also intelligence sharing, both of which it had previously cut off to Ukraine after that stormy meeting at the Oval Office between President Trump, President Zelensky, and Vice President J.D. Vance. Since initiating the efforts to end the war in Ukraine 3 months ago, the Trump administration has aligned more closely with Russia. It has voted with Russia in a United Nations vote. It has also resumed broader diplomatic ties with Moscow. It has left in place existing economic sanctions, but not ramped up pressure with additional sanctions, even as Vladimir Putin has shown very little signs of pulling back in the war. In fact, President Putin has expressed no agreement with a US proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. He says the terms still need to be worked out. He's been dithering on this 30-day ceasefire proposal. Putin instead says that any cessation of hostilities should lead to a lasting peace, and that can happen only if they address the root cause of the conflict. Putin has also expressed concerns that Ukraine might use this ceasefire period of 30 days to try and rearm, and that is exactly what he wants to avoid. But the Trump administration has something else that it needs to contend with. Civilian casualties have risen quite alarmingly since the Trump administration first began ceasefire talks a couple of months ago. If you were to look at the civilian casualties between then and now compared to the same period a year ago, and this is data from the United Nations, there is a substantial increase in the number of civilian casualties, and that is something Trump is concerned about. Ukraine back in March had agreed to an American proposal for an unconditional ceasefire. Russia, though, is still holding out. In addition to Putin's call for direct talks, the spokesman from the Kremlin also said that Russia will only accept a truce if Western governments stop supplying arms to Ukraine. None of the Western governments have agreed to that just yet. President Trump has taken a generally conciliatory stand towards Russia. He's offered major concessions to Russia, including barring Ukraine from NATO forever, recognizing whatever territorial gains Russia has made in the Donbass, which is in the east of Ukraine. However, Putin has not budged. He has shown no willingness to compromise, and that has led to a degree of frustration from the Trump administration. Despite this, Putin maintains a level of engagement with Trump, possibly to keep diplomatic channels open and also to leverage the situation as he feels to Russia's advantage. But the Europeans are seeing through Putin's game. President Emmanuel Macron of France called Russia's response insufficient, even as he was just leaving Ukraine. He said it was a first step, but it was not good enough. Macron also said that Putin was stalling with his counter-offer of direct talks, and he simply wants to buy time. It's a sentiment shared by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who supported Zelensky's demand that Russia first has to agree to a 30-day ceasefire before there can be direct talks. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey spoke with President Putin. He told him he was willing to host the discussions between Russia and Ukraine. Erdogan also said that a comprehensive ceasefire could lead to a lasting deal which will put an end to the war. But who will end up going to Istanbul is still up in the air. The Kremlin declared a unilateral 3-day truce last week around the country's celebration of Victory Day, which is the anniversary of the Allied forces' victory over Nazi Germany. Ukraine's military did confirm that most long-range strikes in that period had halted, but fighting along the front lines continued without a pause. Russia resumed its long-range drone attacks on Ukraine overnight starting Sunday after the 3-day ceasefire expired. So US President Donald Trump is on a multilateral visit to the Middle East. He is stopped over in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. He's in Qatar as well as the United Arab Emirates, all meant to secure major investment deals to bolster the American economy. Trump described himself as a peacemaker while he was addressing the US-Saudi Investment Forum in Riyadh. He reiterated the claim that his administration had helped broker peace between India and Pakistan in order to avert a potential nuclear war between both countries. He went on to say, if at all a nuclear war would have broken between India and Pakistan, it could have killed millions. India has, of course, unequivocally rejected any kind of third-party mediation. It's maintained that the ceasefire understanding with Pakistan was arrived at in the result of direct discussions between India and Pakistan. But the US president continues to insist that it was American mediation that paved the way for this temporary peace between Delhi and Islamabad. Let's first listen in, and also we'll try and analyze some of the big announcements and the big deals that have been signed in Trump's very first foreign visit in his second term.
Just days ago, my administration successfully brokered a historic ceasefire to stop the escalating violence between India and Pakistan. And I used trade to a large extent to do it. I said, fellas, come on, let's make a deal. Let's do some trading. Let's not trade nuclear missiles. Let's trade the things that you make so beautifully. And they both have very powerful leaders, very strong leaders, good leaders, smart leaders. And it all stopped. Hopefully it'll remain that way.
All right, so he's made this point on a number of occasions now since Saturday when that ceasefire was announced. Stephen Kalin is the Middle East correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. He's now joining us. So, like I said, Stephen, I mean, he's mentioned this on social media yesterday in Saudi Arabia a couple of times. I think there was an instance somewhere in Riyadh in one of the occasions where he was speaking. He also referred to both J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and saying that they played a role in bringing about this peace. The government of India, of course, maintains officially that no such thing happened. They may have been sort of via media communication, but ultimately whatever was arrived at between India and Pakistan was arrived at bilaterally. Why do you think Trump continues to say this? I mean, is it for political expediency? Is it to claim credit? We know that he's a peacemaker. He's been trying to do that with Russia, Ukraine, with not much success, I must add. He's been trying to do that in Israel versus Hamas, again, with not much success. So why do you think he's doing this in the context of India and Pakistan?
Yeah, I think it's part of his larger strategy to present himself as a deal maker, both in commercial terms and also in geopolitics. He spent a large part of his speech last night in Riyadh talking about how he wanted to bring peace to the region, sort of the Middle East and the broader region, including India and Pakistan. And this is really what we heard last night in his speech was sort of a repetition of what he said before on social media, what the government, what the White House and State Department have said before earlier this week and last week about the role they said they have in helping to resolve this. And then, of course, also the Saudi foreign minister also shuttled between both countries last week to try to play a role. So I think it was very much in keeping with the mood that President Trump was trying to set. He's obviously looking to resolve there are a lot of conflicts going on in the world right now, and he's looking to play a role in ending as many of them as he can. We're also, just sort of a few miles away. The president's a few miles away in Doha now from Iran, where there are negotiations have been ongoing for a month or so now between the U.S. and Tehran on ending that, resolving the nuclear issue and preventing potential other nuclear conflict. So very much in sort of keeping with the larger message he's been sending on this trip.
So just break that down for us, because this current trip, this is his first visit in his second term as president. So he was in Saudi Arabia, he's in Qatar, and then he goes to the UAE as well. These are all Gulf countries, and they have been historically against Iran, against Tehran. And the US has had multiple conversations with Tehran in the last few weeks about its nuclear program. How is Trump trying to sort of append the traditional alliances and cleavages that we know of in the Middle East? He also, I believe, at some point yesterday said that Saudi Arabia will eventually join the Abraham Accords, which is a normalization with Israel, but they will do it at their own time.
Yeah, the region is really, the Middle East is really being reshaped in many ways in the last couple of years. Since October 7th, obviously, the Israeli response to those attacks it included, not only going after Hamas, but also going after Hezbollah in Lebanon. That played a role, of course, in the collapse of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad at the end of last year, who was an ally of Iran. There have been direct exchanges between Israel and Iran. So I think there's sort of a broader reshifting and scrambling of traditional alliances. The tensions between Saudi and Iran have been ongoing for decades. They sometimes are more tense than at other times. Sometimes there's sort of moments and periods of rapprochement, which I think the president is trying to encourage that as well. He drew pretty clear lines in his speeches in Riyadh, that Iran, he won't accept Iran having a nuclear weapon, and that they need to stop their funding of proxy groups across the region that are helping to destabilize other countries. The push for normalization with Israel, between Israel and Saudi Arabia, was notable. It came at the top of his speech, but it was quite subtle. He told the Saudis that he thought it would be good for them and good for the world, but also that he knew that they would do it on their own time, their own time frame, because at the moment, with the war in Gaza raging and no real movement to a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine, it's really kind of a non-starter with the Saudis right now. And then the third issue, of course, is Syria, where he agreed to lift sanctions, and that has the potential to really reshift some alliances as well.
Co-presented by This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
That was a fantastic discussion going on there, and I wish I could have joined you because it was really, really insightful. But we're joined by Lauren Dagan Amos, who's in India specialist. She's a foreign policy expert. Thank you very much for joining me. There are many, Ms. Amos, there are many who are saying that if India was in such a strong position against Pakistan, why did it agree to what is effectively a ceasefire without preconditions? That is what is being said here in our country. First, what is your assessment of the Indian military action and its subsequent decision to agree to an understanding, so to speak, that has led to a ceasefire?
So thank you so much for having me here. It's a complex answer, but it's very straight. I don't think that India went to ceasefire without agreements, without conditions. Okay, as you can see, this crisis, it's not the usual crisis between India and Pakistan. It's a strategic shift that India did in the foreign policy, in the strategy, defense policy. India responds not only with military efforts, but with a clear message. Terrorism will no longer be treated in a separate issue. It's an act of war, and it's very important. It's this very big shift in the foreign policy and defense policy that Narendra Modi brought to India. Even now, we can see in the de-escalation, India is showing that it's not a weakness; it is strength. On India terms, I think India went from this crisis very strong, actually.
Very strong. Well, there is a lobby here that says that India should have signed a formal. They should have dragged Pakistan to the table and signed a formal ceasefire agreement in writing. How realistic and responsible is this observation?
I think that if India wants to be a responsible country, which is, she needs to do something with the Hindu agreement and the Shimla agreement. It's very important because this agreement was the basic talking with India and Pakistan during a crisis time. And it's very important that you should go back to the table, and you will see what can you bring now, which kind of new agreements about the Indus agreement and Shimla agreement. So before the ceasefire, I think these two agreements are very important.
My final question, do you see parallels between India's action after Pahalgam attack and what Israel did after October 7?
I think that India and Israel not for the first time, are dealing with the extreme radicalism, Islamic. And I think India and Israel should do a deeper relationship in the security issues and the policy issues and the economy issues, because they are dealing with the same threats. October 7, it's for India, it's like a Mumbai attack,
Right.
and like 9/11, and like you did deal now with the Kashmir issue. And I think for both of the country need to do much deeper a relationship now, because it's very important and we can do better for each other. We can learn from India and India can learn from us in the field of battle, of course. As you can see in this combat, a lot of things that Israel and India went together to do things was successfully showed the means and the prove ourselves, the relationship prove ourselves.
Viewers, when Pakistan cornered and crippled, sent out desperate feelers for a truce, it was not Prime Minister Modi who blinked, it was Pakistan that begged after it was bled. And yet, the usual chorus of politicians in India, Sanjay Raut of the Uddhav camp, Atishi from the AAP, Jairam Ramesh from the Congress, have suddenly discovered their faux patriotism. Their accusations that Modi sold India out when the military was dominant has shattered the image of an opposition standing with the military and the government in this time of extreme crisis. Viewers, I want us to take stock of what is being said, and I'll just give you one example before I let you hear the individuals for themselves. This is Atishi, who is the leader of the opposition in the Delhi Assembly, and she says, and I quote, "The Prime Minister claimed that Pakistan folded its hands and he showed mercy. But where is the proof of that surrender? Where is justice for the victims? Why did India remain silent while the US took the lead in declaring a ceasefire? If, as Prime Minister Modi later claimed, Pakistan had surrendered, why